Okay, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. We're here to talk about COVID-19 and the future of work. We have two great panelists from the APAC region, and I will introduce them shortly. But I want to start off a little bit with our mission statement here at AI Asia Pacific. Artificial intelligence holds enormous potential to improve the world we live in. It also poses some of the toughest challenges society has ever faced. These challenges should be considered to affect the international community as a whole, and in this context, investing in avenues for dialogue on AI is critical to ensuring that its development is in line with what we want. Our mission is to contribute in opening the path to trustworthy AI in the Asia-Pacific region. So this event here today is the second in a series of dialogues about what is coming in our near future, and we hope to spark a discussion around how we should responsibly shape that future. And as we get started, I want to point out that the UN has just posted an article on COVID-19 and the future of work yesterday. So we're right on the mark with a very timely topic that has a broad impact to the entire world. You can find that article on the UN News website. So in terms of the format today, we'll first have some introductions for our panelists. They'll then have an open discussion on the future of work. This discussion will be shaped by a few general themes that we will show a little bit later. And then we'll have a question and answer period. Now, we may mix the question and answer period with the discussion, depending on how the panelists feel. So feel free to enter your questions at any time. If we don't get to them during the discussion, we will address them afterwards. So I will start out with the introductions. Michelle is the head of IO, which means Industrial Organizational Psychology for APAC EMEA at Pymetrics. And that's where she works with governments in APAC to ensure AI algorithms related to recruiting and talent management are deployed in a fair and ethical way. For those of you like myself who were not aware previously of what an IO psychologist does, it's a person who studies the psychology of the workforce and professional organizations in order to understand how to make them more effective. Michelle has a master's of applied psychology from Monash University. Vincent is the co-founder of FutureWork Studio, a global tech and consulting company that is helping companies adapt to new and more agile ways of operating. He comes from a background of management consulting at McKinsey, working in large-scale corporate transformation, holds an MBA from the University of Melbourne, and was previously an officer in the French Navy. So with that, I will move things over to the panelists as we segue into our dialogue. And I guess I will just quickly ask them to add a little bit of color to the introduction and talk about how you found yourself in this discussion today and what brought you to it. Sure. Would you guys like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to go, Michelle? Or?
Yeah, I can go first. Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, William. So just perhaps a little bit of background around Pymetrics before we get started, and that will be a nice segue into how we're talking today. So essentially what Pymetrics is a talent matching platform that supports organizations to be able to manage their talent needs across the entire talent life cycle from the perspective of really understanding the behaviors and the behavioral footprint and platform that individuals actually adopt and have, and this enables organizations to make data-driven decisions around their people and the implications for that in terms of the world of work. So we work very closely with organizations in terms of helping them understand their people and then make data-driven decisions, as I mentioned. And we've been having a lot of conversations with clients as they're now needing to pivot with COVID-19. And we have quite a long-standing relationship with the AI Asia Pacific Institute. And it was, I guess, sort of a mutual interest that that brought us here today to be able to explore this topic, as we've been receiving more and more queries from clients on a regular basis as to how they can actually navigate their way through COVID-19 and beyond. So Vincent, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So hello, everyone. So as William said, we co-founded FutureWork Studio with Joanne Fair, who's actually in the audience today, 18 months ago. and our mission really is to help organizations with dealing with the future of work, obviously, but also helping employees adopting new technologies and have more fulfilled careers through the different platforms that we have. So Kelly, who's one of the member of the AI Asia Pacific Institute, reached out to me and see if I wanted to talk about the implication of the future of work. And I think that's critical. Like William said, it's very timely with COVID, what we're seeing at the moment. And I think more people are interested in that topic. I think before COVID, it was an interesting topic and quite important, but not that urgent. And I think overnight we've been brought into it. And now everyone is, starting to work from home and more flexibly, and technology is going to replace some of the tasks we do. What does that all mean for careers that we had for 20, 30 years for some people? And how can we continue to thrive in this new environment? So a very interesting topic, and very interested to debate that with Michelle that I met earlier this week, and we had a really good conversation around this already.
Great, thank you so much. And so I'm just going to display the topics just that we talked about before. Let's see. So here we go. Again, we're talking about the next wave of innovation. The 4 topics that we have on the table for today. Number 1, working from home versus working anywhere. Number 2, who owns the talent? Number 3, diversity and inclusion. And number 4, mindset. So with those in mind, I'll open it up to you guys to start out.
Oh, thanks, William. And I think, one of the things that we're keen, this will be a bit of a fluid discussion, I think, between myself and Vincent. And as William mentioned, if anyone has any questions throughout, please, feel free to post, and William, feel free to interrupt us. Otherwise, I think what we found earlier in the week is that Vincent and I can talk underwater. And so we're very happy to, answer questions along the way. And I think, that first topic that you popped up on the screen there around, working from home versus working anywhere, I think that was sort of where our conversation started, earlier in the week when we caught up, because, for many individuals, that has probably been the biggest shift, and for organizations as well, where, overnight they really had to pivot and move their people to their homes, as part of, lockdown measures. And so what that meant was, for some organisations, that was quite an easy and quick pivot. For others, it was, a lot more challenging. And what, I guess has sort of been uncovered, certainly from my perspective anyway, is this whole now conversation around, well, are people actually working as hard as when they were working in the office? I think there's some potential, initial sort of concern from some leaders around, I can't see what's happening. How can I actually have control over what's going on? How do I actually know that the work is being done? And so Vincent, I'll kind of hand over to you to kind of add, that was sort of where we sort of started around, I guess kind of almost exposing some of the leadership challenges that perhaps were already there. And now, we're seeing them brought to the fore with COVID-19.
No, absolutely. And I think it was a shock for everyone, obviously, because a lot of, companies either were born completely digital native, like Pymetrics, FutureWork Studio, and plenty of others. And for us, it was no drama overnight. We were already working remotely. I think for a lot of others, there was a maturity stage, and everyone was kind of, on the maturity stage, going to be at some point more flexible. And then the fact that overnight was very, very complicated. And we had a lot of conversations with our clients that moved at different pace, but also for managers, right? So people that have traditionally had a task to do or a problem to solve, and they could see and physically see their people do those tasks and manage them in very different ways. All of a sudden, using technologies that some of them were not really used to, Zoom, Teams, very new for a lot of people in corporate, but also working from your living room, with your kids, with your pets, with everything else, and the stress, of course, of COVID that adds on top of this the uncertainty. We'll discuss this further, but I think this move from very linear way of thinking to very exponential, or like we don't know what tomorrow is about, and it's very exponential. Like COVID, at the very start, people were not really taking that seriously because there was a few cases. So in a linear world, why would we worry? But in an exponential one, obviously, it goes very, very fast. So I think if we look at our part of the world, we're probably in the best part of the world between Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of Asia. The move, we were already a lot more digital savvy than Europe or the US to some extent, but also our government have done really well to put us into lockdown. People complied, and we're also quite isolated as well in terms of Australia and New Zealand. So that was good, but a lot of challenges, like Michelle said, in terms of working from home and managing people. And the last thing I would say on that particular thing was, this morning I was listening on the radio, and in New Zealand they've done a survey, because now we're back to what we call level 2, which is we're back to work to some extent in a building. We can gather up to 100. So it's a bit different to what Australia is in at the moment. And Singapore, I know you guys still have another month, I think, in lockdown. But the survey came back in 78 or 79% said they were more productive working from home than in the office. Which again, if we were to do this experiment and say to everyone, you have to go from home, but hold on, you have to go with your kids, with your family, and overnight, people would say, no, this experiment will never work. We will not be productive. And in fact, the reality is quite different.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And I think that, this sort of flexibility is something that people have been asking for a long time, right? I want the flexibility to be able to really actually work from anywhere. And I think that what COVID has done is challenged some of the misconceptions around how work should be done and when it should be done. And really now we're seeing conversations around, let's have 4-day work weeks. I think Jacinda Ardern was talking about that. Why do we need 5-day work weeks? Let's go for 4 days. Because we know that people are working longer hours because they are juggling more of their personal life, whilst, they're actually working. There's also, discussions around actually companies moving to remote first. Right? And then having offices. I read a really nice phrase. It was that offices in the future are for camaraderie rather than accountability. And I think that that's a really nice way of looking at it, right? Because it really changes the dynamic that actually we don't all have to trudge to work every day in the same location and go back home to actually deliver work. It's around what you produce, not where or when. Right? And I think that's what we're seeing, that we can do this, right? We are actually mature people and people want to deliver work. And so some of the restrictions that we've had, funnily enough, the restrictions of COVID have actually highlighted the restrictions that we've put on ourselves around how work is done, which probably aren't really necessary. There's a whole field around, whether you believe it or not, around chronotypes, right? Where people are, based on their own sort of personal rhythms, some are more, as some people say, I'm more of a morning person. Others say I'm more of an evening person, right? So when people do work, actually they can do it when it suits them, as long as the work is delivered. So I think we're seeing a lot of that, come through as well, in terms of people's thinking. And then I think what that does is it challenges the existing hierarchies and structures. And we were sort of talking about this, earlier in the week, Vincent, as well, around why does the organisation need to be structured in the way that it is structured today? Things can actually change and organisations can still be really productive. I think one of the things that does come out of this more remote working, and we've seen this at Pymetrics as well, is you have to be more purposeful around the connections within the team. So previously when you're in the office, you know, you might be by the water cooler in the kitchen and you have these incidental conversations. The connection between people now needs to be orchestrated. You know, you need to set up times, and you can still have jovial, you know, conversations, but you actually have to make that time in your diary. So leaders need to think about that as they move forward with COVID. If there is more remote working, well, how do we stay connected with our employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even, you know, fundamentally the way we are structured, that again works well if the challenges are kind of known, if you're mostly in person, needs to be rethought. Even, you know, the concept of a team, a finite amount of people working in your team for a set period of time within a job description. If the challenges are changing, if you can access a lot of people and the geography or the location is not really an issue, what would that mean for the way you work? You know, could I work, you know, on projects across multiple industries or companies like some consultants do already, or freelancers or others? Could I, you know, work 2 days a week in 2 different companies and then have another day where I do something else that I want within the community? And why would that not be possible? Well, the first reason for this is not so much technology, but it's mindset, right?
Correct.
People, I see people, and look, we're all guilty of that, but everyone wants to go back to the equilibrium, which is, you know, we've been taught to do this. We've been taught since we're very little to go in a classroom with plenty of others, and those are the rules. Then we graduate, and, you know, it's the same thing, or we move into the job. It's the same thing. We go somewhere and we take orders. You know, no matter how senior, you take orders. And you don't really choose what you want to do. Although, you know, your passion when you're 18 or 20 are very different than when you're 30 or 40. Sometimes you're still stuck in the same job. And actually earlier this week, Joe and I were talking to one of our clients in an energy company. And some of the employees were telling us, you know, we're 30, but we started as electrician. And all the, you know, the more mature people in our organization are saying, well, that's your career, you know, 30 years, 40 years as an electrician. And they say, no, I really don't want to do this. So I'm going to stay here for another year and suffer through this. And then I'm going to move into a different job. I might do an MBA. I might do something else to just enable me to get somewhere else. And I think organizations can capture this. You know, I think COVID is both a blessing and a curse. It's a massive curse in terms of health, obviously. But I think it's a blessing in terms of the way we work, and we should seize the opportunity to not go back to normal. Michelle and I were talking earlier this week about simple things like, you know, our local cafe here, and probably the same for Michelle in Australia, but was not online at all. And because of COVID, when we were in New Zealand at level 3, which, you know, you could order things and cafes could open again, they all went online. But they went online until level 2. And then when, you know, one morning I was like, oh, I'm just going to order my coffee because I really liked to do this. Just order it and pick it up. It was not available anymore. And I asked them, I said, what's the problem? And they said, oh, you know, it was just for COVID. Now we're back to, you know, physical, no digital. And I said, but why? They didn't really answer. You know, they didn't really have a quite, they were kind of looking at me like, why would we keep something digital? You know, no one's asking for it. And again, I think that's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's around, you know, embracing the opportunity that COVID has provided us to actually accelerate digitization and move things in the direction in terms of what the consumer actually wants, right? And I think that, you know, I'm hoping anyway that a lot of the moves that we've made, you know, we've seen so much change in terms of, you know, we're seeing now, for example, Bunnings is one of our, you know, big hardware stores in Australia, and now it has like a click and collect, right? Normally you'd have to go to this big cold warehouse and pick out all your tools and plants and things. Now you can just order online, drive by, they put it in the boot of your car and off you go. And I'd like to see those sorts of services maintained. I think one of the things that this sort of digitization provides is actually greater inclusivity for people, right? So there are a lot of people who may have health, you know, concerns on an ongoing basis. Let's put COVID aside, but they may have disabilities, etc. That all of this more digitized functionality can actually make our world more inclusive for those individuals in terms of, being able to support them and giving them access to the types of things that, that they need. And we have a client at the moment. We have a new product that we recently launched called Workforce Insights, where you can actually understand the behavioural makeup of your teams and, different in different roles, etc., and different job levels, different locations, and those sorts of things, so that you can start to understand, how does this team function versus this, etc. And one of our clients has asked us for support around how can I look at that data and actually provide people support for working from home, because we expect that this is going to continue, right? So let's understand how can we best support people based on their preferences and their traits. So I think that that's quite powerful. And, this whole notion also of, as we move through and think about how we support workforces is around, talent marketplaces are really taking off, right? We've certainly accelerated, our work around, our talent marketplace to support people who've lost their jobs due to COVID. How can, we help them to redeploy, into other roles and opportunities. And our focus, because of what we measure, is, very much around aptitudes in terms of behaviours. But that skills component is also really important as well. And I think that, when it comes to the behavioural profile of people, those behaviours don't tend to shift very much. And so we're seeing a real focus as well in terms of clients talking about, well, how can I understand, whether my people have grit, whether they have learning agility, and how can I support them and move them, more internally or more easily internally in a data-driven way. And I think, some of the work that you're doing, Vincent, very much aligns around how do people move to the opportunities that they're interested in, but that also they're a fit for in the organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, our internal platform, which we call Hive, really does this. And we talked about this when we met with Michelle. There's a lot of complementarity. But what we're seeing through the experiment that we're doing is really letting employees decide which project they do has had tremendous impact, both in terms of the organization, saying, well, the first thing is engagement. People are more engaged because they can pick things. And that's the first time they can actually decide to not be shoulder tap, but to be on the other side and say, hey, I raise my hand, I'm keen to do this. But also more practically, less reliance on external contractors, consultants to do the work, because your workforce can actually do it. You just don't know, if you go top down, who can do it when they are valuable and if they're willing to start. But when you start enabling this very simply, people start to really unlock those capabilities that they have that no one had. And from an HR perspective, being able to see for the first time what your workforce is really able to do is fascinating. We were on a call earlier with a group of companies that we're piloting with, and one of the managers said, during COVID, we've seen, because of the urgency, some people working across teams on things that we would not have believed they could do, but because of the urgency, we just pulled people in. And those people have been better than the people in the jobs themselves. And so after COVID, now that we're back in kind of level 2, some of them have been offered, roles in those areas that would have never been possible before because of the mindset. Again, you're an accountant. What are you doing in marketing?
Absolutely.
It's not where you should be. So I think it leads us nicely to who owns the work.
Yes.
And we've seen Australia, we've seen that in New Zealand. I'm sure Singapore has some example as well. But companies like airlines, right? And I think we talked about Qantas, talked about Air New Zealand, having to, and Virgin, having to do something with their staff. So a lot of them, unfortunately, got made redundant. But also, like, how do we redeploy those people? And we've seen, Countdown, New World here, all the others basically coming together. Woolworth, which is the Australian one, coming together and say, hey, we need more people. You have people. Can we actually start exchanging? We've been, in touch with DHBs here. So large hospitals saying, hey, we need more people. Airline, you have people. Can you just help us for a few months? And I think this will become, of course, the crisis is sparking that, but I think this will become the norm as we go. And in 5 years, 10 years, people would be like, oh, that's interesting. Companies that were in complete silo competing against others. That's a different concept than today, where there is less of that. Right?
Agree. And I think, one of the, as you say, rightly say, around the, the challenge is the mindset, right? So if I have a team and I have people working in my team, there's almost a sense that they belong to me and the organization, whereas, what we now see is actually there needs, people have been wanting much more flexibility and the ability to move internally and to take on, other opportunities within the organization. We have many clients who say it's easier for someone in my company to resign and then apply for a job and come back in than it is to move internally. And that's just criminal. So I think there's that. I think also, one of the challenges in some organizational models where there might be, say, an equity stake at play, a leader has a team of high performers, they don't want to let them go.
That's right.
But the reality is you don't own these people, and they will vote with their feet and they will move if you don't provide them with opportunities to move internally. And then it's reciprocal, right? If other leaders let their people go and support those, developmental opportunities, which is what we're, the work we do around, internal talent marketplaces within organizations, providing that transparency and the data. The example you gave, I think, is a really great one, Vincent, around, these people who had to move to new projects and are better performers, right? If they looked at their behavioural profile, they might have found that actually their behavioural fit is much better to these jobs than the people who are in these jobs, right? But it's our mindset that people need certain skills to do the jobs in and of themselves, rather than taking into account, what sort of behaviour they actually bring to the job as well. And that's super important too.
But also there is like to this point around managers, owning their people, which is an interesting concept. Because so when I was in corporate and I did a short stint, 2 years, less than 2 years, but I saw that, and it was quite interesting, where people were very protective of their people in terms of not protective in the right way, but also sometimes a bit too much, saying, well, the example you mentioned, I saw that so many times where you advertise a role and then it's way easier to leave the company and apply. But the reason for this is because as a manager, when you advertise a role, if someone else is interested, you have to go and talk to their manager and say, hey, William has just talked to me about maybe applying for a job. So, Michelle, are you okay with this? Which, it's quite tricky for William, because William might just be interested, might just have a go privately and see if he's keen, and he still wants to be employed, right? So I think I understand the concept, but I think that's not really helping employees to start with. I think the other element to this is people think in terms of 1 or 0. We're better than computers and machines, but actually sometimes we think 1-0. You're in my team or you're not.
Yes.
So I have a best performer. I need that best performer 100% of the time. And why? I need 100% of the delivery, maybe, but it doesn't mean 100% of the time. If someone can do the work way faster, then great. Can do other things. I think we need to think differently about this and really getting into. It would be nice to be in a world where people can pick whatever they do, but then you assemble teams like a sport team, where you basically have some players that play sometimes. You see that in sport. Players don't play the full time all the time, right? You're like, well, this one is retired, let's get out. Let's bring someone else. Sometimes not even retired. It's a different mindset, different capability, different skill, and that's how they win. If we just take a team and there is no change for 3 years, can you imagine this? It would be insane. In sport, it would be insane, but in business, it's perfectly normal.
Yeah. I'd like to see a model where, so what the example you gave around, Qantas and Woolworths in particular, in Australia partnering together. I'd like to see a model where that flexibility is provided across corporates, right? So it might be, for example, say I work for a bank, which I used to work for the ANZ, and, I have certain capabilities, but, the organisation itself needs more digital capability, right? So I, will do a secondment, or I'll spend a year or 2 at a, digital organisation or some sort of tech company, right? And then I come back in and I bring those skills, and then I might go out again. And so you're just going to, just get a much richer talent base in your organization, you know, when you're actually facilitating those moves rather than it being left to the individual, well, I have to resign because they're not going to give me the opportunity internally. But if there is some sort of program to facilitate that, I think that would just be a wonderful sort of move, you know, in the future.
There's too much friction in the current environment to do this. Therefore, the incentive is to stay where you are and keep doing what you do. I think one of the interesting things with Hive that we're doing at the moment that is very close to what you described, which is we're working with 10 companies at the moment. They are completely independent companies. They're still owned by the same owner, but they're very varied. So you have an airport, an energy company, a port. So a lot of different capabilities and workforce. It's like around 3,000-4,000 people. But really the group has said, well, we want people to actually move across those companies, be for a few hours, for a few days, or maybe for more as a secondment. You know, I was at the airport, but now I'm working at the energy company in a bigger, tougher role, so then I can access the port or somewhere else. Because they have those people that they really want to keep. But sometimes a company has 100 people and the role is not that complicated. So most of the time, exactly what you described, people leave the group. First of all, they don't see that as a group to start with. They see that as their company and we have 100 people. But then when you start being part of something bigger, because there's this alliance and there is this ability, so you remove the friction of actually working somewhere else, you gain a lot more in terms of productivity, in terms of engagement, you reduce your cost. It's just a very different way of operating than that I think a lot of, not a lot, but I think some very courageous leaders will, trial, then we'll get the numbers and then others will follow and then it will just become the norm, right?
Correct.
But I think we're in this interesting stage. We were talking with Joe a few days ago about, we basically believe that this revolution around work and this flexibility could be as big as the internet.
Yes.
Because if you think about the implication of delocalization of the work, it's a massive implication, right? Mm-hmm. And it could be in of itself as big as the internet to some extent.
Yes, yeah, I agree completely. And I think the other thing that I think that we still are not very good at in organizations is around part-time work, job sharing, you know, these sorts of alternative structures, which you sort of touched on earlier around why do you need someone 100% of the time? Right now, someone might work full time and do, you know, a number of different internal gigs. Say if we want to use the gig economy, you know, analogy. But I also think the flexibility of work is really important. So we've seen with COVID that about 55%, well, women have made up about 55% of those who have lost their jobs. They're the figures in Australia. The US seems to be the same. And I think once again, you know, COVID just seems to be highlighting the inadequacies of the way we currently operate, right? That might have been hidden. So previously, in, you know, one of my previous roles, I used to look after the redeployment and outplacement function. And when I would speak to, you know, vendors in the market that would provide outplacement, they would often say that the first roles that are restructured out in organizations are the part-time jobs, which disproportionately impact women. Right. And so, you know, you have these diversity and inclusion targets that organizations hold dear around. We need more women in management, for example. We need diversity at the boardroom table, etc. And even in the, you know, the entry levels as they move up into the organization. But then you have this leaky bucket, right, where your processes are actually, you know, causing a disproportionate impact to certain groups. And so you'll never hit your diversity targets. No. And I think this, you know, we really do need this sort of disruption around when and how people work and how they deliver their, you know, the work that they need to. So I feel very kind of strongly around that whole part-time versus job sharing. I'm hoping that, you know, we've seen, as I said, a disproportionate impact to women. I think we're going to have to work very hard as a society to redress that balance as we go forward.
And I think government could play a massive role because, you know, I understand the push to shovel-ready jobs and, you know, more construction, but most of those jobs are mainly dominated by male. Therefore, you know, again, encouraging more or you know, widening the gap even more. And I think everything we've been talking about, which is, you know, more flexibility should benefit, you know, and should increase diversity, but only if we really embrace it. You know, only if we don't just go back to what we knew. And so earlier in the week, we were on a call with a few companies that have said, look, we've captured everything we've learned through COVID. And I said, well, it's right, we've captured it. But what are you doing about it? And that was the big thing to say, well, we don't know how to convince some of our senior leaders or board that actually we were better working like this. We have companies that are going back to the office, but in different bubbles. So they have two colors. So Monday, Tuesday is one color, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday, everyone's home for a bit of time. And people love it. Like, yes. Well, and we talk to people in two different bubbles. And one of them was like, oh, it's great because, Monday morning, Tuesday, I can just be home and I ease into the week. And then, I'm at work. And the other one was like, no, for me, it's the opposite. I love being there Monday, Tuesday, and then I'm done for the next, 5 days. And productivity was higher. I think, again, in terms of the 1-1-0, it's again, absolutely right for people that are taking maternity or paternity leave. That, well, people might have a year out before they're ready to go full time, but they might have, 6 months, 7 months. They were like, look, I'm happy to do a few hours. I just want to do something. It's just not practical. And again, the friction to do this is massive. 2 weeks ago, we talked to an Australian company who actually wanted to use Hive to do exactly this and say, hey, we have a lot of people that we want to keep in touch with, that we want to provide some project. They want to work. But the friction is so hard. So everything is manual. So, we need to call and get the manager and say, but how is that person going to know which task I need them to do? And so people just like, if it's too hard, it's too hard. It needs to be very simple for this to happen. And then you can start to unlock a massive amount of productivity that is just not being utilized because it's too hard to do.
Correct. And we've got the technology now, right? So I think this is the thing that, through COVID, we have a lot of, great startups, our focus, one of our key focus areas is around fairness, right? And ensuring, our clients can hire a diverse set of candidates so that our assessments are fair and not screening out disproportionate, groups of individuals, for example. With, for example, the technology that you're bringing, the fact that we have video conferencing like we're on right now, there are now so many ways that people can actually connect and communicate. And what that actually means also is that it does actually unlock the opportunity for people to not have to be co-located, right? People who want to live in rural areas. Like I can foresee, and we were talking about this the other day, that, not everyone will now have to live in the, urban areas. People can actually live further afield and they can do work from their homes. And so all of a sudden your talent pool becomes so much broader and so much more diverse, which, will only, assist organizations further.
But also, what would that do to house prices, right? If the issue with house prices is everyone wants to live in the same square meter, the same area close to the office. Therefore, the price go up. But if you take now the amount of land, Australia, magnificent example, so much land. New Zealand compared to the population, a lot of land as well. Singapore, a bit different. But then when people can actually work elsewhere, the opportunity is just massive. And then we talked about, even the government could think differently about it because, a lot of people will go, yeah, but if jobs can be done from anywhere, how are we going to compete globally? If our wages are more expensive in the US, we've already seen, companies said, well, look, if you don't live in the Silicon Valley, your salary will be probably different because the cost of living in Texas or Oregon is very different to Silicon Valley. And I think, HR teams, payrolls, leaders, need to start thinking about this and say, well, is there a way that I can pay a base to everyone the same, and then maybe different things. So if you want to commute and be in the office, this is what you get. If you work from home, you'll get more money because you need to set up your office and all the rest of it. But thinking creatively about this to enable this. And even, Michelle and I were talking about that when we met 2 days ago, but government could put some restrictions and say, well, 60% of your workforce needs to be located in the same country or in the same bubble, right? And then you can have 40% somewhere else. So you can still maintain, your local workforce working in the same country, providing that the rules could be enforced. But that will be an interesting challenge going forward.
Yeah, agree. And I think even, you know, the events industry as well, you know, I'm thinking about now, you know, there's a lot of people questioning the way that we've done work. So why did I have to travel so much before, right? That was inefficient. And I was on a webinar with the CEO from New Zealand for ANZ, and she was talking about the fact that, you know, previously they'd have, you know, regular meetings that would all be in Wellington and everyone had to fly down, and you wouldn't necessarily always get a huge turnout. And now with COVID, they had to run it, you know, virtually, and all of a sudden everyone was there, right? And so once again, from a diversity perspective, inclusion, you know, you're opening it up. So as I was talking about the events industry, you know, events are just hugely expensive, right? And can actually be quite exclusive, right? There can often be high costs associated with attending those events, with travel and accommodation, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing so many virtual events now that I think that that industry will also be disrupted and much more inclusive to people. So there are so many potential impacts here across industries in so many different ways that, you know, yeah, I would be surprised if we kind of ever look the same again.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a good example is I had an alumni, you know, meeting that I never go to because it's in Australia and I wouldn't just fly for that. But now it's online. So, you know, I was just dialing and see a lot of other colleagues and everything that I hadn't seen in a long time. You know, I'm doing this talk in a few hours in Pacific time. So I would have been, you know, in San Francisco or LA right now, you know, would have had done this or not. Now I just done it. 3 a.m. just wake up, done it, and it's done. So I absolutely agree. I think one of the things to think about in terms of diversity and inclusion as well is, and that's an article that Joe sent me actually just earlier from Harvard, that was looking at the difference in gender, in culture when you're on Zoom. So Zoom is quite, you know, in your face, camera on, everyone watching you when you talk. It is quite threatening for a lot of people. And I think the moderator, or, you know, when you have team meetings with a lot of people, ensuring that everyone has the same amount of airtime, that people that are more introvert, you know, can type things, of course, but, you know, you don't change the introvert if you're in front of a camera and everyone's looking at you. So I think there will be things to do to really unlock that as well, especially as we're starting to see hybrid models. So during the lockdown, everyone was on their computer, you know, one-on-one, and it's easy to have a meeting like this. But the minute you have a group that's in the office and you have 4 people in a room and you start dialing in, you're back to what it was before. So at the moment, because some clients are back in the office, we've said for all our workshops, we want everyone on their machine. No matter if they're like 2-3 meters apart, we want everyone on their machine. Because otherwise you create a real, very different dynamic where, you know, you dial in, there are free jokes in the, it's very different, and you don't connect the same.
Yeah, agree. And, you know, I think we'll open up for questions in a minute, but you just reminded me of a point also around, you know, that inclusivity piece around people who are neurodiverse. So perhaps they might have ADHD, you know, on the autism spectrum, etc. And, you know, once again, it's not a matter of just giving people technology and off you go. It's actually really thinking about the implications for those individuals. You know, do they need some more support? In actual fact, perhaps being audio only for them and having video off, because of the, you know, the sensory overload, is a better way for them to operate. And I think, you know, you sort of touched on this earlier, Vincent, around we need to move to a model across the board of personalization, right? And we tend to just almost put people in sheep pens, right? At this job level, you get this. At this job level, you get that. This location, you get this. And I think people don't want to be treated like that, right? And you get the best out of people, and people are most satisfied where they feel like their needs, values, purpose, goals are being met. And so it's around helping people thrive. And we have the technology to do that, right? That's our mission at Pymetrics, right? Help people find their best fit role where they're going to thrive, right? What you're doing, right, around giving people the opportunity to work on the things that they love. And I think that we have the technology now to actually be able to support individuals. We don't have to have this broad brush stroke approach that everyone kind of gets the same thing, because, it might be unfair to give some people one thing and something, and I actually don't think that that's the case. I think if people's needs are met, they're not necessarily worried about what others are getting, right?
That's right. And we've seen that. I mean, in our lifetime, we've seen, you know, when the television changed so much, you know, and it's probably going to evolve after COVID massively again. But if you just look at over the last 30 to 40 years, you know, 30 years ago, you would tune in a few channels, you know, 2, 3 channels, and people will tell you what to watch. So you won't have an option. This is the movie tonight. You're a kid. It's between 9 and 10 in the morning, and that's it. You know, you miss it, you're done. Today, you know, Netflix is or Disney Plus or all the others. AI is really enabling you with your personalized profile to have recommendations that come up that actually really work. And I was quite surprised because, you know, it takes a bit of time for the AI to really get what you like. But once they get it, every time it's a hit. You know, that 99% match, you watch it, you're like, hey, I really like that. So what if jobs could be like this? What if projects could be like this, right? That would change tremendously what we think. And specifically to our last point on this slide, the difference that I touched upon earlier between linear thinking and exponential thinking. You know, we've been over our course of our life really in mostly a linear world where the pace of what happened tomorrow is the same as yesterday, right? So therefore, you know, everything is predictable to some extent. So you can therefore have, you know, a team composed of a fixed number of people, a fixed job description, a fixed supply chain, all the things that, you know, you can predict because you've been there for a long time. But today with COVID, with the fires in Australia, climate change, recession, all those big challenges, nothing is linear, right? And so if you apply the same thinking of like, it's not going to change and it's going to be at the same pace, you're just going to end up missing the mark all the time. And so that in itself is really changing the way people operate. We've seen Agile, you know, being one of the response. But the issue with Agile between, you know, if you look at the banks and insurance companies or Unix, but also startups, is that they have the same issue. You know, collaboration is still missing. So what you do with Agile, and you look at Spotify as a good example, for software engineers, it's perfect. When you own end-to-end something, you can deliver it. But when you start having those teams that need to collaborate, there's still the missing piece of, well, how do we do this? Because we're really good at doing this, but when you deploy this new software, we don't really know because we have to talk to others, right? Yes. And usually we're in our squad and we're very efficient in our squad. And actually, the less we talk to others, the more efficient we are, right? So that's the paradigm where basically you end up having the same situation as a large corporate, where everything takes ages to happen because of the lack of collaboration as well. So this is still not, you know, solved in an exponential world and thinking, because this is mainly done for linear, although it seems to be, you know, the new thing.
Yeah. People skills will never go away. In actual fact, the more technology we have, the more that they're implemented. Those human skills, right? There's the ability to collaborate, to be creative, innovative, you know, listen to others. All of those sorts of things are actually being amplified, and we need to, you know, support people around that. Yeah. So we should probably open up for some questions.
Let's look at the questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I see we do have a functionality to allow people to ask their questions by voice. So if you would like to do that, please use the raise your hand feature and then we can call on you. But right now we already have two very relevant questions that are in the Q&A. So I will just start to read out the first one just so everybody can hear it. The World Economic Forum predicts that around 75 million jobs will be displaced as AI and other technologies are deployed. How can we navigate this challenge in light of the fact that this process has now been accelerated by COVID-19?
Yeah, I'm happy to start if you want, Michelle.
You start.
So the 75 million is in aggregate. And I think here that's the key word. So AI, robotic automation is replacing tasks, right? Now, when you de-aggregate the jobs that we have into tasks, you see that pretty much 60%, 70% of those tasks can be fully automated. And that's where the parallel goes, okay, well then in aggregate, it means that, 75 million of jobs will be displaced. But that's not the case. It means that actually most jobs, so maybe 80, 90% of jobs will have a part of automation, but the ones that could be fully automated are only 10%. And they tend to be mostly in manufacturing or in frontline operators. Some of those jobs will be completely displaced, no doubt about it. But others, and that's the challenge that we're facing, and that's where the exponentiality of it is critical, because others will have 20%, 25, 30% of the job that is not needed, but the 70% is still needed, right? And you still want to keep those people. So again, if you're stuck into the paradigm of having someone 1 or 0, then you have someone for 70% of the time. And so that's where internal talent management and internal mobility and democratizing this will unlock all these possibilities. And we're not too far from this. We're probably a few years away from already having RPA is not new. Robotic process automation has been around since the 90s. And you talk to anyone who's in accounting or finance, they're experiencing this at the moment. And what they see is people come in and say, well, we're going to get rid of probably 10% of jobs. And that is hardly the case. You get a lot of people that are more productive and have less time in the office, but often it doesn't take out a full job. So that's the big difference that I see.
Yeah, agree. And I'll just add another point. I think the clients that we're talking to are actually welcoming the automation of those more, repeatable tasks, so that their teams can actually work on higher value add, right? More creative activities, the activities that you simply can't automate with AI. And so, it seems like, some employees are concerned, but leaders are not as concerned, because they can see the potential for their teams to actually deliver even greater outcomes for the business, as they're freed up from those more manual tasks.
Well, actually, funny enough, a few days ago we were talking to a team, because we're also doing some work on the impact of this technology on every job, and so we're deploying that with a large organization in New Zealand. And we were talking to the finance team, and most of those guys were saying, well, we are welcoming RPA because we are doing so many of those tasks that we don't have time, like some others, to do those interesting projects. So if that's possible for us, please bring the machines. We want them to take our tasks, and sometimes they're really painful tasks to do that a machine could do way faster than a human. So then we can free up some capacity for those people, and they're like, look, we want to help the organization and be more, the advisors of some parts of the business, as opposed to be on the receiving end of all the problems that people have with finance and all the other things. So I agree. It's not just leaders; it's also employees, and it's leaders' job to actually, paint the right picture about this and to capture the benefit what they really are. And sometimes they're way more than just getting rid of one FTE.
Correct. Agree.
We have a second question. Interested to hear about how we navigate the challenges with bias in the hiring process with AI. We know that large organizations are deploying these technologies more and more. How can we ensure that this is done in an ethical way?
Perfect for you, Michelle.
I can take that one. Yeah, sure. So I think that, the key element here when you're using AI in hiring is to ensure that the algorithms are fair, right? And a big part of what we do, because fairness is really our North Star, is to ensure that our algorithms are de-biased, right? So we check the algorithms when we build them to ensure that they are fair for gender and ethnicity, etc. And what that means is that we are more confident that we will be able to support the diversity efforts of of organisations. So it's really crucial that any algorithm, actually, no matter what it is, whether it's for insurance, for example, that those algorithms are de-biased to ensure that you're not disproportionately impacting certain groups in a way that was simply unintended in the first place. I don't think anyone intends to build an algorithm that is biased, but I think that can sometimes be an unintended consequence if you're not actually monitoring that algorithm upfront in terms of the bias, and then monitoring post-deployment as well from a real-world perspective around how has the algorithm actually performed from a fairness perspective. So I think those steps are absolutely crucial.
And that's where I think when I remember when I was in corporate, one of the key thing was to train up the HR teams. Because most often that's not in that area that the data scientists are located. Although Frontera was the case, like Joe, who's on the call here, set up that function with analytics in there, which was very smart to have those data scientists in HR. And that actually paid a lot to have them there, because they were trying to see those kind of things. So very ethical, and understand the implications specifically on recruitment that a traditional data scientist might not see, or if they're part of another part of the business, they might actually not see it. And again, not by anyone's fault, but just because it's not the way they would think, and they won't see some of the subtleties there. So Amazon was a great example where they deployed that, and they didn't look at this, but they were keeping hiring, white males from Harvard and other Ivy League schools, because that was the profile of people that were successful. But that doesn't mean that others were not successful. It means that the data set was the wrong one.
Correct. Yeah, you absolutely have to look at your data set. And then, if they had debiased their algorithm, they would have found, oh, hang on a second, it's only recommending males, right? So they didn't kind of check, although I don't know if they confirmed the story necessarily, but it has done the rounds.
But sure. Amazon would never confirm. They never talk to the press anyway.
True.
Okay, so we have, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, you go, William.
I was going to say, we have a question from Mufadal. Welcome back, Mufadal. He was one of our previous panelists. Are companies studying how much of their staff can now be replaced by technology or cheaper resources, or sitting in a cheaper location?
Yes, definitely. And you see a lot of, in the freelancing space, Upwork is one of the leader based in the US in terms of providing workers that are based in any parts of the world that are cheaper than the part you're in, because their whole premise was like, what, you can have your headquarters in San Francisco, but what do you need to hire people that are from there, right? You can have someone very good that's based somewhere else, when you can pay someone way cheaper. I think that's gonna increase. I don't think the trend is necessarily bad, but I think the quality is what people are dealing with. So if you go on Upwork, the experience is you get 100,000 people that apply, and the price is very cheap. So it just doesn't really do justice to the job and the task at hand. So I think there is more than just the cost to serve. There is probably also the quality, and again, it doesn't mean that you need to be located in the same area. And the conversation that we had before, I think policymakers and government will have to step in and put some boundaries probably in some of it to ensure the right behavior is promoted.
I think just another point. I think organisations are always looking for effective ways to manage costs, and one of the biggest costs is personnel. And so there was a massive shift at one stage for offshoring. A lot of Australian businesses were offshoring to Bengaluru, to Manila, etc. And then now those locations have also been disrupted by automation and technology, and some of the cost savings that are available there. And part of that is also around ensuring that these businesses are sustainable, right? So they can actually employ individuals, and also shareholder return, right? And I think unless we change that sort of business model around providing value to shareholders, etc., there will always be that need to ensure profit, and businesses will need to pull the relevant levers to actually support those goals. And part of that will definitely be around people they have, and also competitive advantage that can be brought by having different talent actually take on different opportunities as well.
I think if we move away from looking for the cheapest, we'll get a huge amount of diversity that comes from so many different countries that will solve those big problems that we have within organizations. But if the mindset is only cost at all costs, then we'll end up in the rat race and no one wins, basically. I think if I'll just add an additional question on the quality tech measures to monitor staff performance. I'm aware of, in terms of recruitment, so to recruit tech people, there are a few platforms now that are doing some really robust testing in terms of the performance ongoing within staff. I don't know if, Michelle, you do that a bit with Pymetrics, but I haven't heard many companies deploying that across and being successful at measuring the real performance in the tech sector.
I mean, we do studies with our clients when they deploy Pymetrics around the impact that we've been able to have on quality, and we've had some really fantastic results in that regard because of the algorithms that we build, or the success models that we build, are very much focused on solving the challenges that the client has at that point in time, and it would be specifically around particular performance measures, attrition. What is it that's keeping the business up at night from a talent perspective. And so because we're very, laser focused on that, then, we see some really strong results. And so that's a way that we certainly support our clients to measure the improvement in talent, through the technology that we're deploying. That's our approach anyway.
Yeah, and I think that the tech is quite it's quite hard because it's a science, but it's also an art. Coding, you can code something and the thing looks and feels the same, but the code is very complex and can break multiple times, as opposed to a smart way of coding that some coders have, and they make something way simpler that works faster. There's also, if you look at design within an app, for example, is it something you can really measure? I mean, you can measure that by the number of people that are using it, or UX, UI. I think there are a lot of different metrics to take into account, but I'm not aware of one that basically takes all and give a rating score yet.
So we have another question. How are countries in the APAC region evolving with AI? Is Asia still ahead? How can we encourage more collaboration, as in not leaving other regions behind?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I might just start quickly and then I'll go to you. I know that, certainly we've been doing a lot of work with the Singapore government in particular around the frameworks for AI, and Singapore have really differentiated themselves. I think when AI really started to come to the fore, we have World Economic Forum, we have every single government practically was, Australian Human Rights Commission as well. We've done some work with them, all coming up with ethical frameworks. And I think what, the Singapore government did was said, well, that's great. We can have all of these ethical frameworks, but how do you actually do this? Right. And so they put together, a really fantastic, set of guidelines with practical examples around how do you ensure, ethical AI, how do you ensure fairness, transparency, and those sorts of things. And we've been, collaborating with them on those guidelines. And now they're moving to the next version, right, in terms of how do we bring this to life, even more. And so I think they've certainly been very, very progressive in that arena. I think each, location and each government is, is doing their best to ensure that this is a very new field. The Australian Human Rights Commissioner is very much focused on the human rights around AI. And what does that mean? There's been a lot of talk around the divide between the haves and the have-nots will grow even more so because of AI, and some concerns around that. And what we were talking about earlier around bias in algorithms, right? Yes. What does that mean if someone's going for insurance? Or I think there was even some talk, there was a study done in, I think it might have been the US, where they found that the AI had something in the algorithm that disadvantaged people of African American origin, so that their illnesses weren't deemed as serious as those from white people, and so they weren't getting as many health benefits. And there's all these sorts of human rights considerations. So I think there are lots of different lenses as we all try to navigate our way through, what AI actually means for the implications on on individuals and the businesses that employ these individuals and support our economies. So, Vincent.
Yeah, and those frameworks are critical. I mean, in terms of, is Asia leading? I think China is definitely leading the world in terms of AI. The power of AI resides in the number of people and the number of users that the AI can basically learn from, right? And so that's why companies like Facebook and others in the US have made us work for free for them. Each time we go on social media and like something, comment, we're doing some work for free, which is never labeled as work. Obviously, it's fun. It's share a picture, you like it, but that's feeding the algorithm. Now it's a lot of people, 200, 300, 400 million people. But a country like China has way more people there that are using technology in very different ways, and feeding the AI at a much faster pace than anyone else. And so that's to answer the question on that, I think that's definitely there. And we see a lot of application in China. Things are working way faster as well. And again, there is, it's pace and ethics, basically, right? So the more you want to capture information to feed the machine, the more privacy, limitation you might hit, or say, well, look, what was private today, is different to tomorrow. So we can go further there for the benefit of the machine. And that's an interesting debate. And, Michelle, you mentioned that you're doing some work in Singapore and other countries. I think that's going to be critical and vital going forward, that we keep a sense of privacy while computers are getting smarter.
I agree.
So we have another question. Which country would you say has the best policies in place to enable the future of work?
I'll hand over to you, Vincent, for that one.
Yeah. I think that there are a few countries that have put things in place in terms of the future of work. I mean, the UN just released something. It's not really a country, but it will definitely inform policies. I know France was very ahead in some aspect of it. I know New Zealand, Australia were doing some work there. I mean, in New Zealand, we had the Business Advisory Council that the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, had put together to really a task force specifically focusing on the future of work. So McKinsey did a study there and really get some numbers around jobs displacement, skills that were needed. So 700,000 jobs gone, 900,000 jobs created in the next 5 to 10 years in aggregate. What are the skills that are needed? So a lot of focus has been put in there. I think it's still early days. And I think, like we said before, future of work was important, but never really urgent. And, there's future in it. So people are, well, it's not today. I think what we're seeing is that it's today now, it's even yesterday. And so countries are starting to realize that they need to do something a bit broader in that area.
So there were 2 questions raised in the United Nations article, and I'd love to get your thoughts on them. The first question is, to what extent will the pandemic entrench rising inequality? That's a big question. And the second one is, how does mental health play into the remote work environment? Are there concerns that we should be having and dealing with?
So I might start with the mental health one, because I think it's something that I'm personally very passionate about as a psychologist, and we are seeing massive increases in burnout right now with employees, and organisations are very concerned. There was something I was reading, just even today, around some research from Monash University that they just completed, saying that a third of workers are saying they're experiencing severe psychological stress during COVID, and that can be for a range of reasons, such as social isolation, which there's a reason why solitary confinement is used as a punishment, right? People are collaborative, right? They are social creatures, and being isolated from others is very stressful. But in addition, then you've got the financial stress, people losing their jobs or hours being reduced, or pay cuts. You've got job insecurity then for those who do have jobs, and so people now, as they've sort of started to adapt a little bit to this new normal, are also now concerned about returning to work, right? What happens if, as we return to the office, there is a spike? Right, there is an increase in in COVID cases again, and is my job still secure? So we've always had a very stressful, I think, working life, and now those those stresses have increased, and so there are a lot of resources now that governments are actually releasing to help businesses identify psychological distress and actually intervene and provide strategies to actually support, support individuals. And so, as I said earlier, with, burnout, increasing because of juggling work and children at home, as you mentioned earlier, Vincent, and all of the other, demands that go along with that as well. There are some are saying that we are on the precipice of a major psychological crisis amongst, the population right now. So I'm personally really, concerned about that from a health and wellbeing perspective. And I think that, organisations absolutely will have to have a massive part to play. I think governments as well, in terms of healthcare facilities. Challenge is a lot of the burnout is from our frontline responders as well, but we will definitely need more resources to support people's psychological well-being. And I think part of that could be supported by greater flexibility, right? If people are just not feeling like they can work that day, actually it's okay to take a mental health day, right? Just be and feeling psychologically safe to actually say to their manager, hey, you know what, I just need a day. And the manager's saying, that's absolutely fine, you go for it, right?
Yeah. And
so I think that, a greater compassion for each other, that human connection that we're all craving, we now need to show that empathy, certainly to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. We've had a lot of, cases of people really being stressed working from home for multiple reasons, but, from family, the setup, the technology, all the rest of it, but also the sense of not really being left out, maybe am I not part of all conversations? Because in the office, I can see when there's a meeting and there is no meeting. So I know that I'm part of all the important conversation, but am I on the right Zoom? I hear people that are 10 hours back to back on Zooms and I'm not. Am I missing out? Am I doing something wrong? Interesting thing though, is today on the call with the few companies that we were on, they looked at the sick leave, and across the month and a half that we were in isolation, the number dropped drastically, right? So they don't really fully know yet why, but sick leave historically has been at a certain level, and for a month and a half was almost at zero. And so what was it? Because people were staying home and therefore less exposed to other things, probably less stressful for some or others. So that's the study that now companies are starting to do and say, well, look, if people are less sick, it's actually probably better to leave them work wherever they want. And there is this movement starting to be created of companies trying to move from agnostic location. And so the work should be done from anywhere. It doesn't mean that we remove an office. It just means that we allow people to work in different places. And that will change the way our offices are built. That will change what we need to build and how we will, as a society, interact with each other. I think the major issue that I see, though, is our brains are not really designed for uncertainty and constant uncertainty, right? So in the military, we train a lot on this because, as you can imagine, I mean, we plan for a mission, but then when you're dropped somewhere, it's all different. No matter how much you plan, I mean, you still have to plan. But we train a lot to try to be at our best when everyone is not. And that's quite that requires a lot of training, and also very stressed. But the human brain is not made to be consistently worried, and that's why from early days of humanity, people gathered together. Yes, because they can kill more things and eat more, but also because there is more certainty within the group. And you're like, well, if we can I sleep now and you protect me? Right, thanks, I can sleep. Otherwise, I don't stay alive a lot. Right?
Great. And there was a first part to that question.
Yes, it was about rising inequality and COVID-19. Will COVID-19 further entrench the rising inequality?
Well, we've seen examples of both New Zealand, Australia, but also the US that I know of government or wealthy individuals sending laptops, to a lot of kids that wouldn't have a laptop otherwise. I think in New Zealand we hit 90% of kids now have a laptop and can connect to school. I think again because there was a problem and that needed to be solved, everyone kind of went there and solved that. So I think in some aspect, I think inequality will be solved, and people will have access to technology. But it doesn't mean that for every country it's going to be the case, right? I don't know how they managed to do a full lockdown in India, for example, but the population is massive, and a lot of people, are working on a hourly rate or a daily rate to be able to afford food. And if you can't go out and work, food is not going to come to you. So it would be interesting to see how a lot of countries are dealing with this. We're quite lucky here, 5 million people, Australia 25. It's manageable, but other countries have way bigger problems, and so COVID-19 will definitely have devastating effect that we're just starting to see. I mean, everyone is predicting that it will take us between 3 to 7 years to go back to the normal economy that we had before COVID, right? I mean, if you're in the airline industry, it's not tomorrow that all the flights will be back the way, no one's going to fly as much as we were flying before. So that's going to be interesting in terms of inequality as well, for all different countries.
So we are getting close to the end of our time together now. So I would like to ask one final question, as well as let that segue into any closing messages you may have for us. So the last question is a little bit more on a personal basis. How does one prepare themselves for the future of work? Are the skills that lead to success today the same ones that will lead to success in the future? Are there skills or behaviors that lead to success today that may be detrimental in the environment of the future?
I might start, Vincent.
Yes.
So I think that, organizations predominantly, certainly from the organizations that we speak to, have focused traditionally on a set of technical skills that they've felt they've needed to be able to compete in this digital world, right? We need coders, we need people with STEM skills, and we need more more technologists. And so there's been a real focus around technical capabilities. I think what we're now seeing is this shift to actually what we really need to focus on are behavioral skills, right? Or behaviors. And so, people who are, learning agile, people who are persistent, resilience, I think, is something that comes up a lot. Resilience is a learned skill, so you can, you certainly can learn that. But the types of, behavioral capabilities that people have that enable them to, to learn and thrive and adapt in this changing environment is really what's going to actually support people going forward. Curiosity, right? Willingness to be humble, and say, I don't have all the answers, but you know what, I'm going to go and find out. Right? Those are the sorts of attributes that are going to help people to, survive in this future world of work. I think, as you mentioned, Vincent, people are naturally fearful of change, and it's more because they're worried about what they're going to lose. Right? Not necessarily there'll be some wonderful gains that they can make, but they're often worried about what am I going to lose that I really treasure and hold true. And I think that if people aren't, I guess, on board in terms of being able to develop these new capabilities. The technical skills can be taught, right? You just need to be open to those. And so that openness, curiosity, learning agility, all of those sorts of capabilities absolutely will be required for the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think resilience, massive skill there, and adaptability. Those two are critical to continue to learn or to master, if possible. But also passion, right? I think we are getting into a world where it will be possible to start selecting the things you want to do and make a living out of this. There are tons of ways to learn, online without leaving your house. You can learn so much. It again comes down to mindset. Everything is hard. Yes, there is no easy way ever. But I think now and in the future more than ever, if you just wait for things to happen, they are less likely to happen. If we move into this world where it's more like the Netflix of things where you select. If you don't select, things won't come to you, right? If you stay idle.
Or things will happen to you that you don't want to happen to you.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you will be left behind.
Exactly. So you've got to be in the front of the curve, and no one's going to do it for you. From a career development perspective, from an internal mobility perspective, if you want something, you do need to put yourself out there and go for that. Yeah. There's a saying, if you don't make a decision, you're actually making a decision.
Yeah.
Right. Because something will happen anyway. So you may as well drive that decision.
And it's the law of numbers, right? Like, you see countries that have moved fully digital now. If you said, look, I'm never going to use a computer because I can do my basic stuff without a computer, in many countries, it's just not possible anymore because enough people have moved. It's like this herd immunity, but like for other things. If enough people online, well, 5%, they'll get online. And so I think for work, it will be the same. As soon as we start moving and people see benefits, again, in the next 5 years, we'll see a lot of flexible. I think COVID-19 is not gone, and it won't be for a period. And that's one, virus. There are plenty of others. There are plenty of other problems with climate change that will happen to us. So I think the future is brilliant and it's scary at the same time. But we're humans. We've survived because we didn't stay idle. So there is no change there.
Agree.
Well, it looks like a good time to wrap up. We're right on time. I wanted to say thank you first to all of our attendees. And thank you for the great questions that you've asked. Thank you to Vincent and Michelle for sharing everything that you did today.